Over the 500-year history of Europeans in North America, the conversation on race has been bookended by black and white. There are, however, profound conversations to be had in the middle of this dynamic that include Arab, Latin, and Asian Americans. We welcome a special guest to our studio today, author and educator Frank Wu. Frank is a graduate of the University of Michigan Law School and current distinguished professor at the University of California's Hastings College of Law in San Francisco. Importantly, he is author of Yellow, Race in America Beyond Black and White. Frank, welcome back to Michigan and welcome to Feel Like You Belong.
Great to be here.
Yeah, and especially thank you because you're really on vacation and you snuck an hour away from your family to actually join us in the studio while they're out kayaking.
That's right. It's important to have this dialogue, so thank you so much.
Great. Again, thanks so much. I want to start off by asking you, who is Johnny Sokka?
Johnny Sokka, yeah. So he was the star of this TV show that I watched growing up in Detroit in the 1970s. This is back when there were only 3 major networks. There was no cable television. There were no remote controls. To change the channel on your TV, you had to actually get up and walk over to the TV and change the channel. And if you turned on the TV, there wasn't anyone who looked like me and my family. We were the only Oriental family on the block. That term was still in use then, connoting a sort of exoticism, as if we belonged on the other side of the world. So it was really rare to see anyone with an Asian face. My parents liked watching a old show, no one's going to remember it, The Courtship of Eddie's Father. The reason they liked that show, there was a character named Mrs. Livingston, who was the maid, the housekeeper, the live-in housekeeper, and she was of Asian descent. And so they just got a kick out of that, and I remember that show. I can still
somebody like
whistle.
us on national
That's
TV.
Right. And you don't realize how important that is, that representation. So Johnny Sokka, this is one of these old Japanese TV shows from the late 50s, early 60s that someone bought, dubbed, and imported into the U.S. And if you watch it now, you think, oh boy, I can't believe this is not the best show.
Not all that well done.
That's right. But when you're a kid, it's so meaningful. And
you saw yourself in that character.
That's right. As Bruce Lee and whoever else. Mm-hmm. But then, I would go to school and be teased and taunted, called names, chink, Jap, and gook, and told to go back to where I came from, which was just right across the street.
Because you were born in
that's right. Yeah,
Michigan.
That's right. And so Johnny Sokka was both a hero in a way, but also he became that stereotype, that image. So whoever was on TV the weekend before, so if it was a Godzilla monster movie, right, then I would go to school on Monday, and it was as if I was a character of the Godzilla monster movie, because my classmates, they also didn't see anyone who looked like me, unless it was breaking cinder blocks with your head, that sort of thing, martial arts. And so,
or Japanese running from Godzilla.
That's right. So I'd go to school and be challenged to kung fu fights. Now, it's not because my classmates were bigots. They were just kids. They just watched TV. But if you ask, where do people get these ideas, these images? Well, it's easy to figure out. They watched TV when they were kids, and this is all they saw. Right. And so then you reenact it again and again and again, and you have these images, right? It's the martial arts expert or the hordes fleeing Godzilla in Tokyo.
Yeah. So talk about your family, because your family is Chinese.
Yes.
Yeah, and your parents are both immigrants. What's that like growing up as one of very few or no Asians in your suburb?
So you're expected to fit in, to assimilate, and you're made sort of a promise, right? If you are just like everyone else, you'll be accepted, and if you're not, you'll be shunned. And the idea is everyone has to fit in, except it doesn't quite work, because even if you learn exactly how to be like your peers, somehow you're trying too hard, right? So when I was a kid growing up, I'll be honest, I'm ashamed to admit this now, but I was embarrassed of my parents. Everyone's embarrassed of their parents, actually, when you think about it.
But you had this extra component because they talked funny and
That's
ate
right.
strange food.
That's right. So when you're a minority, when your parents are immigrants or newcomers, it's not just that you're embarrassed of your parents the way teenagers are normally. It's also you feel that you have to hate everything about your ancestral background,
Sure.
right, in order to be accepted. And there's something not quite right about that. But you're absolutely right. You know, my parents, I knew my friends' parents wouldn't be my parents' friends, right? Because my parents ate things that were different. My dad was always trying to get me to eat chicken feet. You know, I'd go to school, my mother would pack a lunch, and people would say, ugh, what is that you've got? That smells weird, and you're using chopsticks. You know, what's wrong with you? Why aren't you like us? So, you know, my mother, she'd spend all afternoon making a 5-course meal with a steamed whole fish. We used to actually, one of my fond childhood memories is driving to downtown Detroit to a place called Eastern Market. You might remember.
Oh, absolutely.
It's still there.
Yeah.
And it's one of these old-fashioned places where you've got butchers, fishmongers, a cheese shop, and so on. It's one of the few places in a racially divided city, which Detroit was and is, where you have African Americans and you have whites, including white ethnics, as they used to be called. You have people of Arab background, Jewish background, Latinos, and Asians, all shopping together because they go to the butcher and the fishmonger and so on.
Because everyone loves fresh food.
That's right. So my mother would make the steamed whole fish, a very traditional Chinese dish, you know, with the head still there. Sure. And, you know, my father would want to eat the fish eyes and so on. And my brothers and I, we would turn up our noses at it. And we'd say, we want pizza. We want
spaghetti.
We want hamburgers. You know, hot dogs. Meatloaf. We just wanted to fit in, and people don't realize that when you're a kid, you just yearn to be normal.
Not stand out.
That's right. Not be picked on. And bullying it's so traumatic. People don't realize, you know, kids suffer all sorts of physical harm. They fly off the swing set, knock their teeth out. You know, you tumble downstairs, you break your arm. That actually makes you cool, right, to wear a cast, right? And you recover in a way that adults couldn't. Adults can't recover from high fevers the way kids can. You get over that, right? But even now, when someone drives by, rolls down their window, and uses one of those racial slurs, that packs a wallop. You know, it still has that punch to it. Even though, I'd like to think I'm an adult, I'm successful. You know, there's nothing they're really going to do to me in all likelihood.
But that psychological pain lingers.
That's right. And teachers would say, "Oh, just reply. Sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me." And even as a kid, I realized there's something not quite right with that. It's not just that there's the psychology, which as a kid I wouldn't quite understand, but I knew that there was a power to these words, right?
Yeah.
It's not just that; it's that the words come before the sticks and stones, right? The words are what lawyers call fighting words. They get people riled up, right? If someone is drunk or has a temper, it can lead to much worse. So they're not just words. And the truth is, my childhood wasn't terrible. I didn't go to bed hungry at night. So understanding these moments of bias, and we didn't know that's what it was. See, my parents believed in the American dream. That's why they came here. We were struggling to fit in, and we didn't speak the language of civil rights. My parents didn't because they literally spoke another language.
Right.
And I didn't because I was just a kid. So we didn't understand this is prejudice, right?
On the topic of civil rights, I want to go to Vincent Chin.
Yes.
Because this is a seminal case in American legal history, better known in the Midwest than elsewhere. But I'd like you to talk about the importance of Vincent Chin.
That's the case that brought it together for me, because when you're a kid and you face these issues, people say, just lighten up. It's just a joke. You don't have a thin skin. You can get over it. But then the Vincent Chin case happened, and even though,
and can you tell our audience who didn't hear that
that's
story?
right. I didn't have it so bad. That case showed me. It was a key. It explained to me my own life and explained to me the extremes that these words could lead to. So I didn't know Vincent Chin, but I know his story well because I grew up right then, right there. So in 1982, this fellow who's about a decade older than me, Vincent Chin, so he's of Chinese background, a U.S. citizen, salt of the earth, working class kind of guy. He was not the model minority. He had dropped out of school. He was learning. He actually gone back to technical school. He's going to be a draftsman. Okay, so to understand what happened to him, I have to mention a couple of other things that you would know, being from there and having lived through this time period. It's a terrible recession. Okay, as bad as anything we've just been through. In fact, even worse, because then the land of the rising sun, Japan, everyone thought was going to take over. People wrote books and gave speeches about how the little yellow men, were a threat.
And southeastern Detroit, for our viewers from farther away, don't necessarily know that it's so heavily dependent on the automobile industry.
The Motor City. Yep. It's not called that by accident.
Right.
It's all about making cars, and that's why we lived there. My father worked for what was then the Big Four, one of the Big Four auto manufacturers. So the context is so important. Terrible recession and an economic threat from Japan, and Detroit is all about cars. You would know this, but some of the viewers might not remember. People didn't drive Japanese cars back then. Honda, Toyota, Datsun, Subaru, funny names, little cars, 4-cylinders. People would make fun of you.
If you showed up a parking lot, you would get keyed.
You would get keyed, and they would say, "Real Americans buy American. You're not a patriot."
Well,
right?
And they had a slang expression for the Japanese cars.
They would call it Jap crap.
And I'm familiar with rice burners.
Yeah, rice burners and so on. So it wasn't just about products. There was a whole sense of racial competition, of yellow peril. There's a long history of all of that.
Sure.
Right, so this fellow, Vincent Chin, okay, Chinese, not Japanese, American, not foreign, working class guy, he's about to be married, has a bachelor's party. What could be more American? Red-blooded American male. He goes out to a seedy part of town, okay, on June 19th, 1982, encounters two other gentlemen. Auto workers, father and stepson, white. They look at him. According to witnesses, they start to use those racial slurs, same ones I heard on the playground, chink, Jap, a slur you don't even hear very much anymore, nip. And then they use some language I shouldn't use here, but they used an obscenity, you little, fill in the blank, and they said, "It's because of you, we're out of work," which makes no sense at all, because he's of Chinese descent and he's a U.S. citizen, but what does it mean? Because of you, we're out of work. It means they blame him for the success of Japanese car companies. So he represents Tokyo and Toyota. Long story short, they kill him. They bludgeon him to death using a baseball bat. And they literally crack his skull open, so with blood and spinal fluid and cerebral matter pooling onto the pavement beneath him, he crumples. He utters the last words, "It's not fair." He's brought to nearby Henry Ford Hospital, and as the EMT, the first responder on the scene, said, nobody recovers from a head wound like that. His head's been broken open. The guests who would have gone to his wedding went to his funeral instead. That's not the end of the story. That's terrible, right? And the two perpetrators, they never denied. They admitted they killed him. No question about that. But they said this had nothing to do with race. It's just a bar brawl. It just got out of hand, even though the witnesses said they'd used the racial slurs, that they had said, "It's because of you, little blank, we're out of work." And then they had actually driven around to search for him after they had a little bit of a fist fight. And they recruited a bystander and said, "We're going to catch the Chinaman, we're going to bust some heads." So cleaned up, sober, represented by good legal counsel, they went into state court. They took a plea deal because all these witnesses, the Detroit Tigers had just finished a doubleheader, all these witnesses saw this terrible beating with a baseball bat. Actually, off-duty cops had to stop it by pulling their weapons and ordering the father to stop swinging. Witnesses would say it looked like he wanted to hit a home run. They took this plea deal, manslaughter, not murder. They were sentenced to probation for 3 years and a fine of $3,000. This led to a huge mass movement. Nobody had ever seen it before. Asian Americans marching and angry, writing letters to the editor and giving speeches.
And up until this point, Asian Americans had pretty much kept their heads down.
Exactly. The image was passive, submissive, apathetic, polite, right?
Don't
Quiet.
rock the boat,
Exactly.
don't make waves.
And there was a truth to that stereotype. Asian Americans weren't angry in the way that this case
Marching, shouting.
That's right. Brought people together because you all look alike, right? Didn't matter, Japanese, Chinese. You know. And so it united people of different ethnicities, which wouldn't happen in Asia. There's no love lost between Chinese and Japanese in Asia. But
There's a long, bad history.
that's right. But among Chinese Americans and Japanese Americans, the death of this man was the birth of a movement, of this idea of Asian Americans, so that you want to come together and insist we're Americans. We're actually on this side, right? This is where we've made our home. We're stakeholders. We've put down roots here. This is where our families, our children and grandchildren will grow up.
Sure. And I want to switch in that direction now because our time is running short. You talk in your book, because when people say Asian American, they don't really understand that Asia, well, it's the largest continent both physically and numerically on the earth, with cultures as wide-ranging and far-flung as, East Asia, South Asia, Central Asia, different religions and completely different foods and languages and practices. So lumping them together is somewhat awkward and maybe artificial, but you talk in your book about the importance of building coalitions. Could we sort of end on that conversation?
Absolutely. That's how we realize the promise of a diverse democracy. This nation is unique, this city upon a hill that beckons the world over. That's what drew my parents here, probably your parents or grandparents, and basically almost everyone here whose ancestors came voluntarily. They believed in a set of ideals. And so Asian Americans had to overcome ancestral hatreds. Their grandparents would have been at war with each other.
Sure.
To say, here, we're going to reach out. Mm-hmm. We're going to form an association. We're going to work together for common defense and also to advance a set of principles. This is what gives me hope. And this is why my own little story, we all have a story, right? We all have a story of where we're from, literally and figuratively, why we believe what we believe. And yes, I experience prejudice. But when I think about that, what I realize is my understanding of that should make me empathetic to others, to African Americans especially, because when they walk down the street, it's not some kid doing karate moves, it's someone who thinks they're a thug, a purse snatcher, a rapist, a murderer, or worse. And the type of racial profiling that goes on, I should see that, yes, it's happened to me, but rather than just complain about me, I should reach out and I say, wait a minute, it's happened to you, and you, and you, so there's something bigger than just me here. This is, and bigger than each of us.
And our common concerns transcend our differences.
That's right. And that is what gives me hope, because if we can see that, then we can live up to the promise of this nation that any of us can come here, and by believing, we can achieve this equality.
Awesome. Awesome. We're going to have to leave it there because the time's absolutely flown by, but I want to encourage our viewers to pick up your book. It's great reading, it's well written, but there's so much data and so much thought-provoking material there that it's even a decade and a half later, still really powerful words. Continued success in your work now in San Francisco, and definitely keep in touch with us.
Thank you. Thank you.
You bet. Thank you for joining us today. If you're watching on TV, stay tuned for our follow-up segments featuring tips on American English, culture, and humor. If you're watching online, you can view archived conversations with the many powerful voices who represent these diverse and dynamic United States.
The Constitution means nothing, so he's doing his best to just stick there. And he's even trying to create some